Good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads, episode 99. I was just chatting with my guest saying, I can't believe this. We've done this 99 times. I've never been that consistent at anything in my entire life. Well, I'm glad you're here. It's good to have you here. Thank you for doing this with us. Today is the last time we hope we're going to be talking about COVID news. Now, if anything changes, we'll bring it back up. But sort of a monumental day here. Because things are dropping. Now, that being said, we did just get some news right before the show. The Washington County numbers, even though the testing numbers haven't changed, are actually starting to rise. So who knows? The plan is we won't be talking about COVID much after this, but if that changes dramatically, we'll bring it right back. With that, after we talk about the COVID numbers, we continue with our early stage funding series. Hope you're liking the series format. It sure has been fun to talk to people in big chunks about topics that are really, really important to medtech companies and medtech efforts. And this week, we'll be continuing with Margarita Hernandez from Ann Arbor SPARK, herself a startup veteran. And also, she now works with so many startups, getting them the early stage resources and funding they need from within the walls of the Smart Zone Ann Arbor SPARK. So we'll be talking with her in just a minute after that. Later on in the show, we're going to be joined, hopefully, if the technology works, live from a show floor by Brandon Martin, who is the CEO of Reaction Technologies and founder. He's made it to a trade show largely with the help of Ann Arbor SPARK funding that he's received. So he'll be talking with us about his experiences getting early stage funding. But with that, let's go for the last time now to the COVID metrics and vaccine distribution, although today we're just going to cover two slides. That is the national picture from healthdata.gov, trends compared to the winter 20 and 21 peak. And as you can see there, things are now dropping way down below the 25% mark, compared to 100% being that peak for hospitalizations, cases, and deaths in the winter of 20 to 21. So things definitely heading in a good direction. That being said, like we were chatting about just before the show, you know, the deaths during this last peak weren't really that different than deaths during the previous peak in aggregate when you integrate the area under that curve, to use a fancy term. So we'll see. We'll see where this goes. But if last summer is any indication, we do hope that there's some relief ahead. In fact, one more look here at the excess deaths curve from cdc.gov. This goes all the way back to about 2018, and you can see how excess deaths were historically under this average trend line. And then come COVID, excess deaths well above it, with a notable reprieve last summer. They've dropped again. They're below the trend line, and we'll hope that that holds. Well, that's it on COVID for now. Let's talk about a couple things happening locally. First, we had the folks from MHeal on a couple of months ago. And still coming up, April 9th, the external design review that MHeal is holding. They would love to have you either as a guest or as a reviewer. They'd love to hear from you. April 9th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. should be a good time at Rackham Auditorium. I'll be there and hope to see you there as well. Also, the A2 Biosocial. I was just talking with Matthew Himes this morning, and the process continues. In fact, he told me they had about 30 people at the last A2 Biosocial. I know it had dropped during COVID, obviously not being able to be in person, but they soldiered faithfully on. They're back at York on April 13th, 4:30 to 6:30, and they're going to be in person. Sounds like it was a great time last time. 30 people coming out for live networking. Should be even better. Myself, I'm going to be at a medical device trade show that day, but I know Matthew would love to see you there, so please do go out and see the gang at York on April 13th at the A2 Biosocial. Well, here we are in the series Early Stage Funding. We've talked about MEDC funding last week with Denise Graves. This week, we're going to go on and talk about local resources coming both from MEDC out of the Smart Zones, as well as ones that are uniquely offered by Ann Arbor SPARK, both funding and mentoring and all sorts of other cool things. After this, we'll be going to angel investing. That will be next week. There's going to be one special week after that, but we will continue along with other funding sources all the way up through April 29th. So I hope you stay with this series as we continue. And with that, it brings me to our guest, the inimitable Margarita Hernandez, the VP of Entrepreneurial Services. I'm going to get it right, Margarita, from Ann Arbor SPARK. It's good to see you always.
There we go. I unmuted myself. It's nice to see
Hey,
you too.
the wonders of
And
Zoom. It's PowerPoint and Zoom. I tell you, 100 years from now, we will still be wrestling with the same issues. It's just the way it's going to be.
absolutely, absolutely.
It's good to see you back on this show, and always good to hear from you. So many things that you can talk to us about, Margarita. Um, but I think for those who haven't, who don't know you or haven't gotten to know you, I'd love to have you just start with a little bit of your background. Who is Margarita Hernandez? How did she get here to be the VP of Entrepreneurial Services at Ann Arbor SPARK? Tell us a little bit of your story.
Yeah, sure. So, for those of you who may not know me, my name is Margarita. Sometimes I go by M, depending on how you want to articulate yourself. I'm actually a transplant from Austin, Texas. I came up here to do graduate school, work on my PhD in molecular cellular developmental biology at the University of Michigan. But during my time, I wasn't traditionally just interested in just the bench work, but more about science and technology, public policy, and reproductive sciences, and even just into strategy, consulting in general. And life kind of took its hold, and I ended up, I had a daughter during graduate school, and it gave me a different kind of insight and very, what do I want to do with my career? And I met a team of people from the Searchlight, Scott and Visha, and I kind of early then from started just doing due diligence, kind of understanding what is an idea, what's a med tech idea, or what's a tech idea, and how does it get commercialized? And then I bit the entrepreneur bug. Shortly thereafter, I graduated and I joined Fast Forward Medical Innovation at the University of Michigan. This is the medical school's incubator, where I had a role primarily just education and commercialization, working with David Olson, working with John Servas, Connie Chang Kevin Ward at that point. And it was just really a great time to be at the University of Michigan working with FFMI and all these cool things that they were really trying to just an effort, trying to educate residents, fellows, and physicians about commercialization. And during that time, I was also working with other programs that were supporting young residents and fellows and medical students about entrepreneurship when I met Michael Moore, and he offered me an opportunity to come and work with Pathware. And at the time, it was a very different company. And, I just grabbed an oar and started paddling. It was a gracious team. I enjoyed the tech. It was a beautiful market fit. And things really just started going. I've had my own, I'm a mom, and I wasn't able to travel as often as I wanted to be able to do. And I kind of had to do a little bit of a career switch, into which I got connected back with Bill Mayer here at Ann Arbor SPARK. And when I jumped into my role, I had both worked as a student, as a PhD in the ecosystem, doing the first tech track that was involved with Spark at the time, went into companies working for, startups and was exposed to a lot of different things, but then taking my experiences back to Ann Arbor SPARK, where I really had this niche experience now that there's lots of biotech and healthcare startups and applications and innovations just coming out from a lot of the different spheres all over the community, not just the University of Michigan. And so with those experiences was really helped to elaborate and grow the pipeline of healthcare. But being at Spark, it's not just healthcare focused, it's industry agnostic. And their focus really is economic development as a whole. And so what did that mean? Because I didn't have any experience or knew what any of that meant. I got introduced to members of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, or the MEDC. I met various smart zones that were similar to Spark, but I got to know a little bit more about Spark, but the Ann Arbor community as a whole. And what are we great at? What kinds of ideas are really out there as far as tech and other kinds of businesses? But really the goal with Spark is economic development. While they are very young ideas in the ecosystem, there's lots that they need to do to get from an idea or an idea on the back of a beverage napkin to a well-formed business, so that they in turn can find space here around the state, whether it be in Ann Arbor or not, and hire other people, and the economy grows from then, that, from there on out. And really it was the exposures to all of these things that kind of gave me a greater appreciation of what my role is at Spark. And that is really being an enabler, being an advocate, and speaking for those who really don't, they are navigating these fears that have lots of different challenges. Matter of fact, the challenges kind of don't really have a check plus, although we want them to, but there's lots of different challenges. And, with the backing of Spark and looking at all the things that are really challenges, how can we help expedite people, the culture, and tech ideas and businesses towards doing something that really in turn is great for the state, for Ann Arbor, and the people that are here within our state, and how is that going to make an impact as the state of Michigan across, the entire globe. So kind of I started with as a scientist having, and still do very much have imposter syndrome, and just trying to figure out how do I articulate science but tech in general to this point where it's like, how do I turn all of this great stuff to helping others? And I've really enjoyed my role doing that to this point, and can still continue to do that. Yes.
If you have imposter syndrome, we're all doomed. So, and you've got a PhD to your name, and so many experiences. I love the way you described it, Margarita. You said you grab an oar and start paddling, and you went on from there, but it really struck me when you said that a moment ago, because I thought, that's what makes so many of the people that I love interviewing on this show and in our community so powerful. It's those ones who grab an oar and start paddling, and you see a lot of scenery when you do that, right? Sometimes you're paddling upstream, right? But you get to see a lot of scenery. And so then when you get to a position like this where you're able to speak to a startup's experience in really diverse ways, wow, you're bringing a lot of stuff with that. You've seen a lot along the way. So I need that on a T-shirt somewhere. Grab an oar and start paddling. That's the motto for things. You mentioned the smart. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. The Silicon Valley. Whenever I've always go back to that show, because it was really truly, here's a young idea and here's all the green mistakes that you can make in that show. But it really was the bear is sticky with honey versus grab an oar and start pedaling. The opportunity is there, go see it for what you want to see, versus grab an oar and start pedaling and it'll come to you no matter what, however hard you work.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, we want to engineer solutions, and we'd like to figure out what the right way to do a startup is. And that's good, we should, but there's so many times when you got to make those mistakes as quickly as you can. You've got to get in there and you got to try stuff. And that's what I love about that mentality. You mentioned the smart zones, and we came off last week from talking with Denise Graves from MEDC. Ann Arbor SPARK is one of the Michigan smart zones. Tell us just a little bit about this map that we have up here.
Yeah, sure.
And just to give us an overview from where we sort of came from last week, this week we're going to be talking about SPARK's offerings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But Spark is amongst, you see those numbers. Each of those numbers is correlated to a different smart zone that the MEDC, the state, has recognized as an actual smart zone. Now, I honestly, I don't know if Spark or who was the first smart zone, and I don't think that really makes a difference. But I think what's interesting is that they're strategically placed throughout the rest of the state. And it's interesting to think about, what do each of those smart zones do? Because the MEDC provides these smart zones with funding to help startups and young businesses grow and bud and have resources and connection. But I think what kind of sometimes gets kind of glossed over is that each of these smart zones has its own intricacies, its own internal, its own industry expertise. So when I first started at Spark, I had really no idea what the other smart zones were great at. How could I help them? How could we support one another? And then how do we all come together in various things? And, just first starting out, putting my foot out, Ling Rocket Lab, which is actually the most recent addition to Smart Zones. That was the first ones of that team that I got to really know. But what I got to know is that they're really, really great at various things. So in the state of Michigan, one of the Renaissance points is we're fantastic at manufacturing, from tier ones all the way to, all the different tiers to big OEMs. We have these really great manufacturing points. And while we got challenged and many of those manufacturers for the different tiers really decreased, we're really trying to bring a lot of that emphasis back. Some of these smart zones focus on manufacturing. Some of them focus on early prototyping and, large scale. Some of them focus on just different aspects. The other thing I would like to also introduce, with that is that how do we all work together with the smart zones? And that what I see from Spark is really great at various things, including some amount of healthcare, mobility. What we do great though is we really are great at starting ideas and really kicking the ideas and making sure that they're robust enough. Is there something really here? But there's lots of things that we are not that great at. And that's where we're really working with other smart zones and saying, hey, I've got this company from Brazil. They want to put their, North American headquarters here in Ann Arbor. There's a space here, but they've got these application points. And this is a really great match for both Automation Alley and Centropolis and Lean Rocket Lab and some of the other things they got going. And they've got those expertise. And so that's a really good example of like how our ecosystem is sharing some of its resources, but also like thinking, what are we great at? What are we not? But then how can we support one another? And in part through the company being successful here in the state and doing the goal of having economic development being something that is a real business and hiring people in the future.
Yeah, it's a really cool process, and how you guys are sort of working together as a state. And so all of these really cool places. I think my only complaint here is that I don't see one up on Beaver Island. I think we need a smart zone on Beaver Island. But no,
I would love that, especially if it's like in a little dome where I could just look up at the stars too.
Yeah, and see it all. And of course, that's not the idea, right? Like the point is putting these around population centers and places where you can access those human resources, among other things. And it is cool to see how each of these smart zones is diversifying and even focusing, I guess, and showing what their part of the region is good at. And that's been really fun to watch happen. Well, let's zoom in a little bit on Spark here, because that's where you are and that's what you represent. And of course, Spark can bring MEDC funding to bear. Spark also has other resources it can bring to bear. I guess tell us a little bit about the story of Spark, how it came to be, and then let's broach into what are some of the resources that you guys can bring to bear to projects.
Sure. So I'm gonna tell the story how it's been experienced by me and how it was told to me, and that Spark wasn't originally called Spark. It was actually called the IT Zone. And it was founded by a group of people, some of which members were Mike Finney and Lauren Bigelow, where they wrote up this grant process and they worked with the MEDC to really establish this counterpoint of headquarters of how a local tech incubator where groups of people, a startup, early company, a company, it doesn't matter, can go and get resources, could get a mentorship, can get, small amounts of funds, but can be this nutritional, foster for a number of ideas that are just starting off or at various other stages as well. And then it has evolved. Mike Finney actually moved out to Miami and he's doing great things there for economic development. And Lauren Bigelow has made her way around the state doing great things for all different areas of the state and a number of the companies that are around the state. And now where it's evolved is that Spark is now part of the compilation of various smart zones, which we were just talking about. But it also works very, very closely with the city. And it's really helped define the novelty of how Spark is today. So, and both the MEDC provide funding to the smart zones. And these are to help companies, at different stages. Sometimes they can be very young, sometimes they can be a little bit more well-established. Spark is also one of those smart zones that receives funding from the MEDC. But additionally, Spark took some different strategies into working with the city of Ann Arbor, and that the city of Ann Arbor is also worked through different partnerships and proposals and grants, with Spark towards building. Let's also focus on our community and how can we help build value? And then it comes in a variety of other things, not just funding, traditionally how like the MEDC had created funding mechanisms. Instead, it kind of took a more of a form of how can we help build value by connecting people to attract talent, but retain talent. And we'll talk about some of those things about what they are, but also building programs and building them a little way in more of the way of looking at the customer. And the customer were, we got people who are innovators and they're scientists and engineers, and sometimes their partners are working at the University of Michigan, and sometimes their partners are just someone who has a great idea, but they start from the ground zero, an idea on the back of a beverage napkin or something a little bit more preformed. But they didn't know how to grow a business, and they didn't understand what were the next steps. How would they build a team? Would they manage a team? But then how do they go and have, these solid conversations that are going to help them and get money invested into the company to help them grow? And so we really have carved out, while working with the city, focused on programs that really help build value and, through in part funding support towards these companies to really help them grow in these really early stages so that they can be successful in our ecosystem, stay here and build jobs, and thus, fitting the goal of economic development. So I guess I'm going to go back to your question. The difference is with MEDC funding and then Spark, being a little bit different. It's really carved out and really looked at its client. And because of the funding that we were able to really work through with the city, it allowed us this kind of space to pilot different programs. So one of those first programs really was boot camp. Boot camp is got mentors, and it's got companies that are very early stage, and it puts them through a rigor of making sure, is this a good idea? Do they need more team members, and what kinds of team members? What does their business plan look like? Have they validated the technology? Lots of customer discovery, lots of discussions of what is a value prop? How do you pitch and articulate yourself, and what the value of what you're trying to eventually create as a solution? Additionally, what started to happen was you had these successful companies that were also exiting out from businesses. So we've got the Duo that, went to Cisco, and there was lots of talent. Expedia, recently, right before the pandemic, there was lots of talent in the ecosystem. Accuray, there was, I could just kind of keep going on through some of these success stories, but where did the talent go? And we don't want them to go anywhere else. We want them to stay here. And so one of our early programs really is, how do we help connect these really serial and experienced entrepreneurs, whether they were, aces at marketing or business dev or regulatory or, software development, and connect them with these companies that are very young, naive, and, they've got a bottleneck problem, and they need someone that's very strategic on their team to guide them through some of these challenges. So we put together what is more of a pilot of a entrepreneurs in residence program. And this program has really been a successful and key marquee point, but it has to be for the right entrepreneurs. And we'll talk about how do you find the right entrepreneurs and how do you assess here soon. But other programs, not just for mentorship in itself, but we have lots of talent. I think an interesting point was we had KLA 10 Core, who's originally from California, set up another head-based R&D that's here in Ann Arbor. And why did they do that? They primarily were focused on looking at the talent that University of Michigan spits out as far as the semiconductor space, and that was their real goal. So it kind of opened me up into some other things that were happening in our ecosystem, and that was the virtual reality, the augmented reality, the experiential reality. And that's more of just understanding about the customers, that what's happening in our ecosystem, but how do we build programs that not only bring the talent here and bring other companies wanting to be here to recruit the talent, but how to retain the talent. And so from this, what we've been able to successfully do is, if you haven't already have heard, there's a program called Michigan STEM Forward. And what the goal of this program is to connect businesses and companies from around the state. As long as you were providing a STEM-based related internship, there would be interns we have a database of them, and there's lots of other types of like interns that are in the ecosystem from other universities, and we're trying to connect those two so that we're not only retaining the talent, but we're attracting talent, and we're getting them comfortable and empowering them with educational opportunities to build their career for the future.
Yeah, that's
So
such a cool
that
program too.
it is. I think really what happened was these abilities for us to pilot and double check, do these programs work? And then from then, like right at the pandemic, the MEDC, we were working close with them. Is like, this has been a successful program. And given what's happening with the pandemic, everything is going remote, why not put an incentive that really helps other communities, help the state thrive with retaining its talent? And that's something that we worked out together, and it's been phenomenal program ever since been implemented since 2021 was really its bigger implementation, but it's been growing, and we've been really happy. And I know other groups and businesses have just been speaking mounds about that program.
And now it's a statewide program available
Absolutely.
anywhere. We're gonna be using it this summer actually. So yeah, it's
That's fantastic.
such a cool thing. I think it's interesting, Margarita. We're talking, here today about what sorts of resources are offered, and of course, we're in the middle of an early stage funding series. But I actually really like how what we've been talking about thus far is people and customer
Mhm.
discovery, right? Because give me a dollar, give me $100,000, doesn't matter if I don't have the right people to work on it, and I don't know that I've got a customer I can address. Everything is stopped. So I think it's really cool that Spark isn't just sitting there going, oh, you need some money to do some work? Okay, great, here you go. It's putting that ecosystem around. It's doing, as so many others do as well, but it's in that area, it's putting people together, whether it's early stage, like the STEM Forward thing, taking internships, or the boot camp, where I know it's not just a matter of teaching people, it's also introducing to people to others and showing them how the ecosystem works. So I think that's just such a cool thing. There's something to back up those funds when they do come.
Yes.
Well, tell us a little bit about the kinds of things that companies come to you all the time, and they come in also. It's not just med tech; it's all sorts of things. They come to you and they say, "I've got this idea and I want to move it forward," and you've usually got some pretty good news for them.
Yeah, we do. We do. I think, but therein lies, it's not tricky, but it is a process. Not all, no idea is the same. Sometimes you got a really, really great team, and they're working together, and you've seen them through. You've heard about the challenges that they've gone through together, and so you're like, all right, you've got a team. That's great. Two, what is the idea? And how well have they been working around this idea? Does it have patents? Have they de-risked it? How far have they brought it to this point? But then three, there, of course, there's a market fit. Sometimes all you've got is a really great idea, and you've got a solo, entrepreneur who doesn't really have a team, and you got to figure out what you're going to do with that. And you got to understand, do they got, fire in their belly? Are they going to make this work? Are they coachable? Are who else have they talked about? They take customer discovery and implementation of that, and really try to understand to help them grow their business in the right ways, as they put themselves out there. Do they take that effort and care to really be in this position? Because I mean, Gene, you and I, and lots of this ecosystem knows, being in an entrepreneur, being in a startup is really challenging, and you've got to be able to take the punches, and you got to be able to pick yourself up when you fall down. Are they going to be resilient to that? And if they aren't, how can we as Spark provide value points that, is this a great idea? Is it a great team? We can help them do the rest. Is it too risky at this point? And then can we put them in programs that will help us de-risk and better understand this individual and the idea at the same time? Is this going to be something successful, worth our time? And there's tax dollars as well as other private funding, but we want to protect that. So it really is a delicate balance, but it's the maturity of the people that here are on the team with Spark. And I'm sure other smart zones take, somewhat of a similar approach, depending on what their programs look like. The bet is on the jockey, the bet is on the idea too, but it really is the team that's going to move this. Where are they? Can they be resilient? And so it really is a delicate effort of mixed things that we go through this weighment before we take on a client, and then being transparent with them up front too, of this is the time that you're going to have to put in these are the measures that we're going to have to be able to see. And maybe, yes, I'm going to give you some grants and things are going to be, hunky dory, but at the same time, they got to be able to show milestone developments on both the business, both the tech, the team, and articulate that well. And so I think it's not just Spark, though. I want to make sure to acknowledge, the New Enterprise Forum, the Accelerate Health, the 20 Fathoms, all, and all the different smart zones that are part of us speaking together about cool ideas and teams, knowing that they've got what it takes to make it to the end, to be here, and making it worth the rest of all of our times, because we put so much effort and we're really trying to create a positive and growing, ecosystem for tech development companies, the vendors between, but really having that bigger impact for the state of Michigan.
It's really interesting that you say it that way, Margarita, because I think when somebody comes, I guess a question that comes to mind is you have all these different resources. Some are monetary resources, some are educational resources, some are even sort of labor resources with things like Michigan STEM Forward. And is your process always the same? Like you have to go through the boot camp or else you can't get anything else? Or do you sort of pick and choose? I know Spark is really known for looking at those milestones and saying, okay, if we gave you some money, did you meet the milestones you said you were going to meet? And if not, that next dollar is going to be hard to get. And if you did, then there may be more. But how much do you mix and match also with the other programs and say, I wouldn't always recommend this for everybody, but given what we've seen with you, we think it would be important for you to go through some program over here. How much mix and match is happening there?
That's a really, really good question. And this is going to be a little bit of a longer answer. And so I will say, just this week, I met with a potential client, and they wanted to know the differences between, if I become a Spark client, what do I got to do, or what's going to happen? And I'll describe that process. But they also wanted to so traditionally how Spark works is it works with its clients that are, yes, within the city limits, but also sometimes with clients that are outside of the city limits through virtual cliency. Virtual cliency and working with Spark, we have a different way of how we provide the grants to clients. We have to do a top-down analysis of assessing, okay, where is the team? Where is intellectual property? What is the solution? What have they done for customer discovery? A lot of these things just to kind of knock around the tires of an idea and on the team. And we can provide them the funding, and we look through milestones, and we continue this iterative process where it really is just keeping a pin on where are they? Are they doing what we think they should be doing? Or, have they gone ahead of that, or have they stayed focused? That's going to be a long-term thing with us. And sometimes, that's a really great thing for people who are very green, maybe have a younger stage idea, because they're going to spend a little bit more time in our programs, doing a little bit more hardcore mentorship from the beginnings and understanding the fundamentals and creating their toolbox of how to be, yes, a great leader, how to consistently evaluate their idea and their team, and how to make, the best decisions for the startup company moving forward. But conversely, at the same time, you got others that are still very young, but they might have already had lots of mentorship, or they might have had some of these experience, and there's no, point to discount any of that. They are very strong. And so when I present information of, you could be a Spark client, and there's multiple ways to do that. The other way is sometimes BAF is much easier for some. And it's really setting up the clear expectations of timings and what the customer needs, and making sure that is this going to be a great value of their time? But sometimes, it's not going to be a great fit, and that's fine. I think it's also just telling them and being straight. I think BAF will be a great, thing for them to do. They've got certain things in alignment. They've already got this stuff going, and they figured it out on their own, and that's great. I don't want to hold them back. I think would be another great, opportunity for you to go with BAF. But I think it's not to say that, different companies are at different, they're all at different stages, and there's different benefits from each of these. They do come with, their own time constraints. The other thing is, I will say, Spark has its staff and its people, but in BAF, or Business Accelerator Funds, is what the MEDZ provides as far as funding. The A funds are what Spark provides through support with the city. So those are the two differentiation points. But there's also associations of lots of other types of resources when you are a BAF client. One big head thing that I will definitely give lots of kudos and credit to, because there's so much part of our own programs and support towards clients, is SBDC. So the Small Business Development Corporation consultants that really make a really big difference, because their ability to work more one-on-one, but bring a brevity of an idea of what it's going to take to fill out the BAF, how is it going to get executed, and really explaining that process, but helping the client. I mean, you can only do so much hand holding. The idea is that you want them to put skin in the game and make sure that they can do these things, and articulating an executive summary and a great, set of a proposal there, that ultimately, no matter what, through both of these ends, there will be a bigger panel of review that will review everything that you are as far as a business, and decide whether or not your funding abilities from both of these mechanisms. So I think it's really just understanding the client, what their needs are, where do they want to go, and how do they want to build it, and being transparent on how do you want to spend your time, what's valuable for you, and giving them that information so that they can feel empowered to make the right decision for them as they navigate through different funding subsets, different smart zones. And the other thing I will add is Spark definitely has its own funding and programs that it's unique with, but so do other smart zones. So, Detroit, Tech Town. I mean, I very much enjoy Marlo and her team, and they've definitely got their industry sectors that they're really strong with, and that's some of them that, I'm not. So, if I got a client that's coming from Detroit, I am very transparent of, have you talked to Tech Town? You've got one of these that they're really great at. You should go back and revisit it. So it's also, what does the smart zone have to offer? What sector are they in, and what can they get as far as value? Maybe just starting out at Tech Town and then eventually making their way over here, or starting somewhere else, vice versa. So it really is dependent on the client. No journey looks the same.
So the message there is, wherever you are in the state, reach out to your local smart zone and find out, because they've got cool programs and things that they can either locally or statewide leverage, or like you were mentioning with Michigan STEM Forward, something where one smart zone may administer it, but it's available anywhere in the state, which is so cool. It's interesting, Margarita. I don't think I was thinking this before we had this chat, but it really strikes me very strongly the way you've described the communication that needs to happen, the layers of review and stuff. Like, Spark is making funds available to startups that might not otherwise have a shot at hardly anything. They're nowhere near like venture capital. Sure, they might have access to some grants or something like that, but in one sense, it's very friendly money. But the price that it comes with, it strikes me as very much a price of communication, which, when I look at successful startups, it's the startups that are unwilling to communicate and unwilling to partner, unwilling to take care of their stakeholders, in fact, that never amount to anything. And the ones that can really make tracks, they are the ones who almost over communicate with their stakeholders. Man, they're just always informing their investors and their partners, this is what's happening right now. And it strikes me that you're really training folks in that, because there are all these options and all this stuff moving, and it seems like, oh, there's free money over here. But there's a very big lesson coming along with that need for communication and that need to justify one's direction.
Absolutely. I think, and this is funny because I'm a scientist, or was a scientist in training, but when I got out of graduate school, the ability to articulate an idea, to create a pitch, to think beyond who is my audience and how am I going to communicate this idea, was a very important factor of to be successful. Getting into my role, but I can say it just for any company, any kind of startup idea. You have to be able to articulate what that is, your needs. You need to be able to articulate for yourself and your team. It becomes even more important when you start having, these business marriages with investors. You need to learn to be confident with yourself. You got to be confident about what you are, what you need, and being able to articulate that to investors too is an important point. And If investors don't feel complete, that they can understand what your story is, where you're going, and everything else in between, they can see right through you. And so it's really important, and then maybe this is a great setup for your next, part with angel or investments in general, but investors are also talking to each other amongst the state. Our state is very powerful in that it does communicate about companies, but also people who happen to be in our ecosystems who are not the greatest for startups, but they, solicit mentorship, for example. That's part in us communicating to other smart zones and teams, making sure that they understand that there are people out there that will try to take advantage of you. But at the same token, you need to be able to articulate, be confident your idea, because when you pitch it to investors, they're going to be able to tell whether or not you know what you're doing. And maybe you don't, and that's okay. They can give you that feedback, because I think wholesomely, as the ecosystem is, we want to do right and be right and grow awesome things. But we also have to create this transparency point of being dependent, create, be who you're going to be and do it well. And when you get investment and when you're trying to grow, people will then trust your brand, that you do know what you're doing. So it very is much when you get a person who is a green entrepreneur, you tell them to do something and then they go back and they don't do it, how is that trust going to be now moving forward? The same thing goes with investors. The same thing goes with building your team. It's really starting off a lot with those points of communication, because the ecosystem, it's definitely changing and it's definitely growing. And I've since the pandemic, it's been doing amazing things to really come together as one bigger unit. But it really is, we're dependent, and we've been created to start these bigger pipelines where we can communicate and we know who you are. And we'll continue to ask questions to others because we rely on our allies and our partners to, put good faith into these companies. Even when they are young, we will take some of those risks. We will help them find pilots. We will help them find executive, their CEOs and CFOs and everything else in between, their talent. It's just a matter of knowing what do they need and do we trust them? Can we trust them to do right by us too?
Yeah, well, and speaking of those partners and those who benefit from this and who get put in that seat of needing to communicate and then being boosted by the community, it's the strength of a small community. Is if you're on the good side, people will rally around you. Like you said, if you get on the bad side, not a good place to be. You might need to find another community. But it's so cool when you can see that community coming around somebody. Before we welcome our mutual guest on, Margarita, just give us the names of a few of the companies, because I know we wanted to just chat briefly about this. We're not going to have time to go through all the case studies in great detail, but some of the companies that have been helped by this process, that have gone out there and done cool things.
So one of my first ones, and I always enjoyed this one because so I got to know Mark Kiel because I actually once interviewed for Genomenon, and I really enjoyed the team. I got to meet Mike Klein for the first time, but I also learned about the story. Mike Klein's this PhD MD who came out of University of Michigan with an idea along with Steve Schwartz, and they had this phenomenal idea in the very early iterations. And through our EIR program at Spark, they got connected to Mike Klein. And it wasn't until that introduction, well, I mean, they had great things going, but Mike Klein, with his expertise and connections of people, really amplified this team, and they went, straight upwards, right? And you can even look them up now, same thing. I think other great experiences are, we talked about Ataza, we talked about KLA 10 Core, but there's also other younger ideas. So Culture Bee, if you haven't heard of her, she's got data analytics to help your business and team grow wholesomely, a positive culture with the great resignation that's happening at this point. What better way to actually have a better way to build your team, but to change it around at this point with Culture Bee software. She came from San Francisco, came into our bootcamp program, went to CEO Masterclass, got an EIR, and now she's looking at the manufacturing for the state of Michigan because 50% of the manufacturing in all the lower tiers are about to retire. So what better way to start informing and making a big difference, especially using all the different types of programs that we have to train young talent and make a big impact for the state of Michigan. I think VR for the state of Michigan. I think VR, XR, or what they call XR, experiential reality, was something that was very small when I first started at Spark, but it was through the partnerships through the University of Michigan and realizing that, and MSU, that we pump talent out in this space like no other. And all the different coasts are stealing it. So what we ended up doing is actually forming partnerships with, the Disney, the GMs, the Fords, the Epics, and the Unity to really show them like we've got a machine that is training these students. We're putting them into internships. We are serious about retaining our talent. And now they're looking at our ecosystem and have started to put other types of programs and labs and recruitment programs to really, for those students, keeping the talent here. And so you can kind of just really see like we really are a unique space, being Michigan with lots of talent and lots of opportunity. But the way that how we connect all of these talent pieces to helping our ecosystem grow, really that's the beautiful intricacy that which we are bringing. And some of those other stories that, you were asking about, just all the different sectors. It's not just healthcare. While healthcare is a big, huge one, and I love that stuff, but we are really industry agnostic. And I think there's great things for all the different kinds of sectors that we're trying to grow here.
Yeah, and speaking of sectors, a good friend of yours and mine, Margarita, really identified a really, really cool niche. We're going to let him tell us about it here in just a second. We're joined now by Brandon Martin of Reaction Technologies from the show floor. Are you in Texas? Is that right, Brandon?
No, we're actually in New Orleans for the Final Four. It's at the National Association Basketball Conference. And I can give y'all a quick peek real quick. Let me show you.
That's awesome. And just as you're doing that, I just want to mention, so Brandon is an example not only of a transplant from Texas to Michigan, but a Spark client. And also we at Into Being have gotten to work with him. Margarita, great case study here because Spark funding gotten him to a trade show here. Brandon, take it away. Tell us about Reaction Technologies.
Yes, so Reaction Technologies was founded from seeing a 13-year-old football player become paralyzed in a football game. He came in to make the tackle with the crown of his helmet using incorrect tackling technique that left him paralyzed. We played the game of football. We love the game of football. And to see a kid become seriously injured through the game of football that we love literally wanted us to make a difference. We realized pretty quickly that we are more than just a safety product. We're a situational awareness tool that could be used in basketball, soccer, rugby, lacrosse. And so we're just out here in New Orleans right now trying to get our message out as far as our basketball products.
And of course, one of the things that always impressed me about your approach, Brandon, people look at that and they say, well, it's a training tool. That's not med tech. And we've looked at so many things that want to help with like sports concussions and things like that. And they're all overcomplicated. And you really identified a niche that, hey, if we could just get people to keep their heads up when they make impact. You've got some amazing videos that would be fascinating for anyone to see, of people making contact the wrong way in football, and you just want to cringe when you see those. And so such
hard to see sometimes.
Yeah, such a simple concept, all based on the execution here. Tell us a little bit about your experience. Obviously, Spark helped you get started here with some of the funding and some of the resources. This is your chance. I mean, you can give Margarita a hard time. We haven't prepared any of this, so if you want to put her on the spot, man, you can do that. But tell us a little bit about that process as an entrepreneur coming from Texas to Michigan, looking for these kind of resources. What's that process been like for you?
Well, actually, Margarita was the person that actually got us to move out here. We actually moved out here about 2 weeks before COVID came about 2 years ago, and so. Everything I read at the beginning of getting into business said, take the business as far as possible by yourself. And so once we got introduced to Spark, we decided to take a leap of faith and move out here to Michigan. And Spark has introduced us to so many they have introduced us to so many different people in our network in Michigan and outside of Michigan. And if you're looking to start a business and you're looking to figure out what's the first step you should take, I would definitely suggest to contact Spark.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. And now what's happening at the trade show? I know you guys are showing some early stage product. How's that going for you?
It's going great. It's like the who's who of basketball, from NBA to college to high school kids are even here. We've had a great reception to our wearable basketball product, and we're making a lot of connections in these first 2 days that we've been here So we're excited for the next 2 days, and we're excited to continue to meet these great coaches.
That's really cool. And Margarita, as long as we got Brandon here, I mean, it's actually a pretty good story here to have a company get to not only prototypes and products, but now they're going to a trade show showing their stuff off. Can't say that always happens with every set of early stage funding, but that's a pretty good life cycle for this particular example. Any highlights as to what has gone well in this particular instance?
I think one of the first things was Brandon had tried multiple times to make it in Austin, Texas. And I think the difference was we had a phone conversation. We had real discussions of this is going to be challenging. It's going to be hard. You're going to move away from your family. Make sure you have your family's blessing, but your family's support from a distance to be here and do the things that you're about to enter because it's hard. I think that was important. I think boot camp and the soundboard are kicking around this idea. I think there was a great partnership when we were able to support him with Dave Morin, who provided a lot of the scaffolding to helping him really understand the business positions of what needs to happen. And he had to carry a lot of the technological development points too, towards getting that stuff iterated and prototyped and getting it ready for pilot and getting it right for the right type of customer and the customer type. The parts include Brandon's marketing. Marketing has been an important point, and educational offerings of how do you articulate yourself, how do you pitch your idea, but also, what does a brand look like and how do you tell a story about what your business is, trying to solve the problem. That has been a big aspect and a growing, point for Brandon that's consistently continuing to grow as he has new types of customers. And, of course, genuinely just showing of love. It's really sometimes entrepreneurs have great strengths and they have different weaknesses. And it's really just taking that and being like, hey, I can help you with this. These are your weakness points. And I think Brandon is a great example of internalizing these are my weaknesses. I want to get better. How do I do that? And acknowledging it and working on those things. I mean, that's what we want companies to do, but we need them to feel safe in those spaces that they can actually practice it. And that gives them the momentum to continue to move forward instead of stopping and being really frustrated in that space.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I can add to that too. Being a first-time entrepreneur, getting around certain people, finding mentors was a very big thing for me. You only know so much. You only know what you know. And so at the very beginning, I made sure to stay true to myself. And when I need help, make sure to ask for help. There are people out here who really will help you, and really want the best for you. So you just got to find the right people to surround yourself with.
Well, it's really a testament to your stick-to-itiveness, Brandon, and taking that advice. But I think from what we've seen of your story, you haven't given your story over to somebody else either. You've continued to push to write that one, subject to mentorship and everything else. But it really does take an entrepreneur who's willing to push it and follow their passion. Before we let you go, give us one more view of that booth so we can see your product on display here.
Let me turn the camera around right now. I'm gonna give you a wearable product that will wear. You will wrap it around. And the numbers would flash, as you can see. Little banners. So nice and simple for our basketball prototype.
Yeah, very cool and useful for different sports. You can look at it and you can keep your head up because you have to call out the numbers in order to be able to keep the drill going. So such a cool,
100%.
Such a cool thing. Well, Brandon, thank you for taking time out of your schedule on the show floor there to be with us. I know we kept you waiting for a bit there, but we certainly appreciate having you here today.
Yeah,
stay on the line.
I appreciate you, Gene.
Yeah, stay on the line for just a second. We will love to take any questions from our audience. If anyone has a question or a comment, we got one there from Timber. We love Reaction Technologies into being at Spark. This is an awesome story. Thank you, Timber. That's awesome. But some kudos there from Timber Shea. We'll leave it open for questions for just a minute more. And while we're waiting to see if there's any other questions, Margarita, as we're talking about these kinds of funding processes that get people like Reaction Tech to their trade show, I think it's just really awesome. What is downstream for you? You alluded to this earlier a little bit, and I know next week we're going to be talking to some angel investors, but what sorts of resources are you trying to get people ready for with your programs, with your funding? What comes downstream from that?
That's a really good question. So I think what's been really cool is the partnerships that have really happened between Michigan Rise, Spark has got a pre-seed fund, and of course we have the Michigan Angel Fund, but we've got a pre-seed fund. And then there's also, ID Ventures. And I really like what ID Ventures has done as far as putting in smaller grants, as far as a beginning pipeline and helping these startups in very early stages. That's making a really big difference. And I've started to see it and with multiple, clients, but, even Brandon himself was, can talk to that testament. But I think the movement of what we're seeing is that we are an awesome state full of mentors and advice. And we need to cap on that. And we need to create incentives and programs that really help companies, yes, while they're early stage, help them de-risk so they can continue to move to commercialization. But working together as form is either mentors or syndicates or other types of programs. How do we move a company from, that's coming out of, Frank Urban Spartan Innovations, and they've got all these, different kinds of things going on for them, but they need to be kicked around this other way. That's, sharing of the ecosystem. The funders play a big role in how a lot of this stuff comes connected, but how do we de-risk, but prepare companies to have discussions with investors? What things do they need to have in line? Can their pitch be, is it up to what they need it to be? Can they talk about a long-term go-to market plan? And I think that's kind of another kind of focus that started to really happen is we've got great companies, we've got great tech. We also need to continue to coach them in a variety of things. And one of those is preparing them for investment. And what is that going to look like? Because it looks very different from the West and the East Coast. And what we have as far as a competitive edge to some of those is the mentorship and really a soundboard that can help lead your company in these very young stages. As you grow, now you've built a team of people who advocate for you, both not only your team, your business and all that, but from an investor standpoint, what are the next stages from then on out? And because we're now creating this bigger process and it's going to attract other investors, other big companies to start looking at our state as a whole as what are you guys building? How are you doing that? Why is it so great? Why would other businesses want to come here to grow their assets and stay here? Because yes, there are lots of cheaper places to live around the state of Michigan. There's great experiences, pure Michigan. So, it's really just thinking about how do we tap on this sector? What else do we need to do to fill in the gap to make these companies great and prepared for what is to come in the future?
Yeah, well, it's really cool to see that kind of cooperation happening. And we're at the top of the hour here, so we'll have to wrap it up. But Brandon, we did get one question, and that was, who's the coolest person you've met so far at the trade show? And also any teams testing out the product live?
So yesterday after the trade show, on the way back to the hotel, we met the head coach of North Carolina, which was one of the Final Four teams, Hubert Davis. And we sat there and talked to him for about 5 minutes. So that right there is probably the biggest coach. The coach from Gonzaga, Mark Few, too. So it's been we've seen a lot of great coaches. University of Texas head coach walking around here, too. So it's the who's who of coaches here.
That's awesome. Well, we're so thankful that you can be there. Hope it continues to go well. Margarita, thank you for walking us through the process at Spark, and obviously for the introduction to Brandon. Such cool things happening, and thank you for talking about it in such a. I think it's amazing because when you have a local entity like Spark, who's willing to sort of share that wealth and say, hey, this is a team effort. Obviously, it just highlights what you guys are doing so well, and appreciate your being here to talk about it.
No, thanks for the opportunity to let me share the stories, but talk about the greatness of what we're building here and why we should continue to do great things.
Let's do it. Well, we'll look forward to seeing Brandon when he gets back to the great state of Michigan, and after this week, we'll be talking next week to Dale Grogan of Michigan Angels. We're going to talk about angel investing next week, something we haven't talked much about on the show. before that. So with that, I just want to thank y'all for being here on MedTech Crossroads. We will see you next week is episode 100. I can't believe it. We're looking forward to it. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.